Happy Advent, you brood of vipers. This Sunday, the second Sunday of Advent, is a Sunday where we hear of two things. We hear of judgment and we hear of hope. The word hope was all over our readings today. Now, I have preached before in past years that while we hear that the themes of each Sunday of Advent are love, joy, peace, hope, right? You've heard that with the different candles. That's actually a 19th century innovation. That's a relatively new innovation because the ancient church had four things we thought about during Advent. The four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. A little heavier, right? Because the ancient church did not see Advent as the run-up to Christmas, which is kind of how we have morphed it into today. It was its own distinct season. We still celebrate it as a distinct season. There aren't really no Christmas decorations. I'm in blue, I'm not in white. But we've kind of lost the idea that Advent is distinct as we run around prepping for Christmas. So those four last things are not meant to scare us, but to face reality. Death, judgment, heaven, and hell. These are very real things. When we face death, which we last week heard lots of eschatological end times readings, when we face death, every day becomes precious. St. Benedict advised us to keep death always before our eyes for that reason. It is knowing that death is the doorway we will all pass through at some point. Judgment. Well, that doesn't always feel good, does it? But judgment is a means of justice, and it is God's judgment, not our judgment. And so it's kind of fitting that on this second Sunday of Advent, we're hearing from the prophets who do pronounce God's judgment on the sins of Israel and Judah. But judgment is necessary for true justice, because if there is no just judgment, then there is no justice. And we will all face the great judgment seat of Christ at some point. And of course, the last two, heaven and hell. Heaven, eternal bliss and eternal connection to God. I like to think of it that way rather than, some cloud-filled thing with pearly gates. I mean, yes, we have those images in the Bible, but I think of it as intimacy with God, connection with God, and hell as the separation from God. Those are very real things. So this second Sunday, we have judgment and we have prophets. Our own collect spoke of the merciful God who sent us the prophets to show us about salvation. And we have one prophet who's sort of all over the readings today. Which one? Yeah, Isaiah. Isaiah, the prophet, captures our imagination in this Christmas season, but also in Holy Week. Isaiah's prophecy is really split into two parts. Most scholars think that the first part probably was written by the prophet Isaiah, who was a contemporary of Amos and Hosea. He preached during that 8th century BCE while there were still two kingdoms, the kingdom of the north, Israel, and the kingdom of the south, Judah. And he stayed in Jerusalem, but he preached prophecy against both. And prophecy is not clairvoyance. He's not swirling tea leaves and reading them in a cup. He's not casting lots. He's not reading tarot cards. He's looking around at the inconvenient truths that the leadership doesn't want to face. Prophets are truth tellers. And they are also casters of a preferred vision of God. Now, in Isaiah 11, this is known as First Isaiah, and it is the first 39 chapters that was probably written at the time that the northern kingdom was on the verge of collapse, but there was still corruption in Judah that was going to bring about its collapse eventually. All kingdoms collapse, and they collapse out of corruption, self-dealing, and exploitation. all kingdoms collapse for those reasons. When people get power, they do bad things with it. Who knew? This is nothing new. Nothing new. And so Isaiah, in this first part of the prophecy, is talking about first he talks about the destruction of Israel and of Judah. Okay? Not a popular opinion, by the way. Rulers don't want to hear that their corruption, their exploitation, their self-dealing is going to cause the downfall. They don't want to hear that. Everything's great, right? According to the leadership, everything's great. Isaiah says not so. And in the 10th chapter, he actually predicts that Zion itself, meaning Jerusalem, will fall to the Assyrians. This is why this is not a clairvoyant prediction, because it didn't fall to the Assyrians, it fell to the Babylonians. He was off by one empire. I'll spot him that one. And he says that they will be cut down. And then in chapter 11, he opens, though, with a word of hope. Nobody really wants to hear about utter destruction without a word of hope. And in the 11th chapter, he says, a shoot shall come from the stump of Jesse, a branch shall grow out of his roots. Notice he talks about the stump. Last chapter, there's going to be a stump. The tree's going to get cut down. Isaiah cannot prevent the violence that is going to befall Israel or Judah, but he promises that's not the last word. And he pushes out a vision of a government grounded in God's justice and Torah righteousness. He shall not judge by what his eye sees or decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. This God will come, a leader will come, and he won't be like the Davidic kings who started the corruption and violence. And I mean, for crying out loud, King David, he was a hot mess, right? I mean, he gets raised up as a man after God's own heart, and then there's that whole Bathsheba thing he does. And violence comes out of the consequence of his abuse of power. The abuse of power starts early, and the Davidic kings have failed epically. But Isaiah says one is coming. One is coming who will bring about this vision of the peaceable kingdom, where the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion, and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. And Rabbi Eliezer said, you know, all of those animals mentioned, with the exception of the snake, can be domesticated by humans, but snakes cannot. And so Isaiah specifically mentions that there will be children playing over the adder's den, putting their hand over the hole out of which the asp comes to bite and to kill. There will be no more violence. What a wonderful vision, right? What a wonderful vision. And we hold that vision in hope, because the reality is destruction is coming. And he makes no bones about that. Now, this is a cycle that repeats itself. Kingdoms fall, nations fall, leaders become corrupt and self-dealing and exploitative and violent. This should not surprise us. It always catches us off guard, but it shouldn't totally surprise us. We just didn't think it would happen in front of our own eyes, did we? But Scripture says it is a constant cycle. And Paul is writing to his letter to the Romans in the midst of that cycle, in the midst of another oppressive empire that is self-dealing, corrupt, and violent, the Roman Empire. And he's writing to the Christians in Rome, and he's never been there before. He's on his way to Rome to get their support so that he can continue his mission on to Spain. Extra-biblical writings tell us he never made it to Spain, but was martyred in Rome, beheaded by the Roman government. But he writes this word of encouragement to the Romans, and he quotes Isaiah. Again, he quotes Isaiah, and he quotes Isaiah 11:10. We just heard that verse, and he quotes it a little differently. The root of Jesse shall come, the one who rises to rule the Gentiles. In him the Gentiles shall hope. And there's that word hope again. The reason it sounds a little different in Paul's letter is Paul is quoting the Greek translation of Isaiah. So the words come out just a little different, but the meaning is still there, that we may have hope. And by the way, anytime you read the word peoples or nations, Gentiles, they're all the same word. The whole world is going to have hope because of the God of Israel. And he blesses them with these words. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And finally, we get our gospel reading. And our gospel reading also quotes Isaiah, but not this part. This part comes, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight, is Isaiah 40, verse 3. This is from the second part of Isaiah, likely not written by the prophet, written some years later, casting the vision of return from exile. So this is the whole hope that we are going home, right? Prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight, the voice crying out in the wilderness. And of course, John the Baptist is casting a vision of hope through baptism. But there's a word of judgment there, you brood of vipers. He tells the religious establishment, do not be comfortable with just the fact that you are part of the chosen people, because the vision is bigger than this. Paul saw the bigger vision. The Gentiles were also going to be included. It was not about one group being chosen and everybody else not. The vision was that God chooses all of us and chooses us to live in hope. Now, hope is a tricky word. It is not the same as optimism. Hope is grittier. Hope gets its hands dirty. Because optimism is that belief that things are going to get better, right? We're optimistic. I had a sexton. He may actually be on our live stream. He tunes in from time to time, and Art always had this thing that he said, I got to get this straight. The pessimist says, can't get any worse. Optimist says, sure it can. And in truth, yeah, sure it can. Things can get worse. We have seen worse in our history, even in our recent history. But hope hangs on even when things are awful. I said, John the Baptist was living under Roman persecution. So is Paul. Isaiah is surrounded by the corruption of his own leaders, and he's telling them the truth, that this will cause the downfall, thus not making him a real popular guy. But they all hold to hope, not necessarily that things were going to get better, but that God would be with them no matter what. That's the perseverance of hope. And to be true, I don't think we develop hope when everything's going great. When everything's going great, we slide into optimism, right? It's going to get better and things are looking up. That's optimism. Optimism crashes when things are horrible. Optimism crashes very quickly when we turn on the news. We can see a lot of things that are wrong, right? But hope says, no, God is still here in spite of what you see, in spite of what you experience. God has not let you go, even when things are really bad. Hope says, hang on. God is with you. And that is the message that is coming at Christmas. Hope doesn't let go. Hope hangs on. And hope requires courage. It does. Doesn't take any courage to be cynical. Doesn't take any courage to give up. Doesn't take any courage to be nihilistic, negative, violent. We can do that really well. Doesn't take any courage. That's actually weak sauce. That's low-hanging fruit. That's easy. What's harder is to hang on to hope and not become cynical and nihilistic and violent. That takes courage. So it takes courage to be hopeful. We have this hope. We Gentiles have this hope that God has not abandoned us. The message coming at Christmas, and even the message through Advent with death, judgment, heaven, and hell, is that God does not abandon us to those final four things. Our God walks with us. This truth is captured, and I will conclude with a word from one of our very own, the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. How many of you know who Pauli Murray is? Couple hands, yeah. Not a familiar name, but she was an Episcopalian, and she was a pioneer. The Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray was a lawyer. She was a civil rights activist. Some 11 or 12 years before Rosa Parks got arrested on that bus, Pauli Murray got arrested in Washington, D.C. for the same thing. It was Pauli Murray who muscled her way into Howard University's law school when that was not a thing women should do, and insisted on going through her law training, became a JD, wrote a little paper, about how you could overturn Plessy versus Ferguson, which established segregation. Her own colleagues, her own black male colleagues, told her she was nuts. Nothing was ever going to overturn Plessy. That was not going to happen. She wrote the paper anyway. She got laughed at. But she was a prophet too, because that paper was used by Thurgood Marshall to argue Brown versus Board of Education. And we know what happened there. She didn't get the credit, but she did the work that made it happen. She was queer feminist. In today's language, she would probably identify herself as non-binary or transgender. Her writings that came out after her death made that clear. But she realized justice was a spiritual issue, not a matter of passing laws. And so she became the first Black woman to be ordained an Episcopal priest. She was also a poet, and she is most known for the words, "Hope is a song in a weary throat." Isn't that a great image? When we're exhausted, when we're tired, when we're worn out, when the cares of the world press on us, she says, hope is a song in a weary throat. It comes from a poem, Dark Testament, verse 8. And I leave you with the poem. Hope is a crushed stalk between clenched fingers. Hope is a bird's wing broken by a stone. Hope is a word in a tuneless ditty, a word whispered with the wind, a dream of 40 acres and a mule, a cabin of one's own and a moment to rest, a name and a place for one's children and children's children at last. Hope is a song in a weary throat. Give me a song of hope and a world where I can sing it. Give me a song of faith and a people to believe in it. Give me a song of kindliness and a country where I can live it. Give me a song of hope and love and a brown girl's heart to hear it.